Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you back to the Dynamic Decisions podcast, where we explore the strategies that drive successful decision making in the world of business. Why? Because the best decisions come from great conversations. I'm your host, Tisha Cable, CEO of C Model Data, and today we have a serial entrepreneur and transformational operator who steps into vastly different industries and repeatedly produces massive results in 90 days or less. His name is David. He's the chairman of the Crypto Industry Association, board advisor at Rewarda, and co-founder and chairman of Elite Trader Academy. He's got over 35 years of leadership across fintech, cryptocurrency, telemedicine, digital media, and wellness. David happens to be a Wharton MBA, a three-time Inc. 500 entrepreneur, a TEDx speaker, and the host of the David Guttman podcast. David, welcome to our show. Thank you so much for being here. I'd love to hear in your own words about you and all of the work that you're currently doing.
Well, that's a heck of an introduction. Thank you so much for having me. I've been a serial entrepreneur for the last 35 years. I saw my dad start a software company in his late 20s that eventually IPO'd. And so I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And, back when I was growing up, I just turned 60. Yeah. But, back then, like if you wanted to learn new information, you had to go to a library or a bookstore. There was no internet. Forget about AI. If I were born today, I would have never gone to college. I would have never gone to business school. In fact, I famously tore up one of my Wharton MBA up on a podcast. That's how valuable I think it actually is. But you learn by doing, and for the last 35 years, I've done a lot of doing. So, and I made a lot of mistakes, which is why I think I'm pretty good at what I do now. Is I've done it the wrong way, and you learn by doing, and you learn the most from the mistakes you make, not from the things you get right.
Oh, that's so good. Okay, so you've walked into crypto ATM networks, telemedicine, digital education, and wellness, and you hit the same timeline each time. This whole 90 days to doubled revenue, or you've shifted the EBITDA. So that type of consistency really means that you see patterns. You see things that actually transcend any single industry. So when you first step into a company, what are the very first indicators that you look at to find hidden leverage, either in sales or in cost structure? And how do you kind of keep industry specific complexity from distracting you from the universal constraint?
It's a great question. Businesses are more the same than they are different. Like I've worked in over 40 different industries throughout my career. And with the exception of crypto, I've never been in the same industry twice. And that's actually not a handicap. It's actually makes it easier because there's so much, there's always groupthink in every company. I always joke when I'm bringing new people into a company that in many ways, your first 90 days is your most useful period of time because you don't know how things have been done. And so you have a clear set of eyes in terms of, hey, why do we do it that way? Oh, that's just the way it's always been done. You hear that all the time. I'll answer the question with a quick story. Years ago, I was partnered with a guy. He had sold a company to Oracle for like $50 million, and him and I did a bunch of consulting work together. He would sell the projects and I would do the work. And I remember he sold this one project where it was a company that made high-end CD-ROMs. You're probably too young to even know what a CD-ROM is.
I know what a CD-ROM is.
But anyway, they did high-end video production for CD-ROMs. I knew absolutely nothing about their industry. And my friend had basically sold this project, said, well, Dave, they've got like 7-8 months worth of cash and then they're out of business. You have 2 weeks to figure out how to fix their business. So I basically have 2 weeks to figure out what's wrong and how to fix it in an industry I know nothing about, in a company I know nothing about. Now, only because I didn't know what to do, I'm like, well, why don't I just talk to every single person in the company? So from the receptionist, the CEO, and everyone in between, it was like 40 different people. And 2 weeks later, I present my findings to the CEO, and he's like, can I curse on your podcast? I don't want to.
I would rather not.
Fine. Okay. Yeah. So I was, how the heck can you know my business better than I do in 2 weeks?
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know your business better. But, you had 12% of the answer, and that person had 3% of the answer. And all I did was listen and synthesize everything that I heard from the folks on your team. And ultimately, there's about 10% of the time that a business cannot be fixed.
Yeah.
90% of the time, there is a solution. If you go through and that really ultimately is the thing that most businesses struggle with is they're so busy in the day to day, what's on fire that day, what problem has erupted, that they can't come up to 10,000 feet and really take a little, even a medium term view of their business. In the case
Yeah.
of the CD-ROM company, all it boiled down to was I did a bottoms up budget and forecasting model from the conversations that I had. And it became obvious to me that one of their lead sources that was responsible for 40% of their revenue was unprofitable.
Mm-hmm.
But by eliminating that channel partnership, they became immediately profitable. So
Mm-hmm.
they went from 7, 8 months away from bankruptcy to profitable company in literally less than a month, just
Mm-hmm.
by analyzing the business and understanding the business in a bottoms up way. And what I would say about that is that actually is one of the very first things I do in any company, whether it's a company that I'm mentoring or consulting to or that I've run myself, is if they don't, most people don't realize this, but most companies under 25 million in revenue don't have a budget, which is
Mm-hmm.
crazy to me. Every company that I mentor, every company that I'm involved in any way financially has two things. They have a budgeting and forecasting model, and they have quarterly board meetings. Now,
Yes.
the board meetings thing sounds like a very corporate thing, but
Mm.
most solopreneurs and entrepreneurs need to do that. In fact, I even encourage people to have what I call a personal board of directors and have personal board meetings once a quarter where you just talk about your own personal goals with people that care about you and that are willing to invest time and energy in what you're, in your life, basically. And
Yeah,
so
that's so
that
good.
basically that's how I go about it. Bottoms up
Yeah.
budgeting and forecasting. Talk to the people in the business, and usually the answers are fairly obvious.
Yeah. You know what happens, which is so interesting, is in entrepreneurial circles, I think a lot of times people focus so much on the innovation, even in a small business situation where it shouldn't be, right? Small, medium sized companies. They tend to forget that you still got to know your numbers, right? It tends to be this whole fever dream of you're going to build something big, but they forget about the fundamentals of actually growing a business. And so it does require an expert like yourself a lot of times to come in and understand what assessment looks like because founders get so excited a lot of times about what they're building, what they're doing, what's going to be new in the world. And they don't recognize that new is only but for a moment and then you've got to continually improve. You've got to continually find something creative and new. And that requires your business to be intact. So,
Yeah,
because you have to be able to fund that, right? I think people forget that
yeah,
it's
they
still a
should.
business.
You're exactly right about that. I mean, at the end of the day, every business, it doesn't matter what industry you're in or whether you have a product or a service, you have customer acquisition costs and you have a lifetime value of a customer, right? So if you don't understand those two numbers in your business, you don't understand your business. And it doesn't matter whether I've been in that industry or that business for 20 years or 20 minutes. You still need to understand those and how infrequently the CEOs of companies understand those numbers and not only just what they are, but how they're trending. Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? What are the things that are making them better or worse?
Yeah,
The
that's
other
good.
thing that you sort of alluded to is what people often refer to as the shiny object syndrome, which you see in early stage companies. I mean, you see it in all stage companies, but you really see it in early stage companies a lot because the kind of personality that starts something new is often a person who gets bored easily, right? So, it's like what's exciting today, maybe wasn't what was so exciting, a week ago, a month ago. And so trying to keep yourself focused on the things that are really moving the business forward and trying to be as clear-eyed and data-driven as you can realistically be.
Yeah,
Everyone fancies themselves, "Oh, I make data-driven decisions and whatever," until their gut tells them something different. Then all of a sudden all the rules go out the window.
that's right. You're not going to be reading me on my own podcast, right? You're not going to be telling me about myself. Okay, so when you were at CoinFlip, right, you quadrupled EBITDA in 90 days by redesigning host rental and commission structures. So that's really operational design, not new technology. Can you walk me through a specific constraint that the prior leadership maybe couldn't see because they were in the industry convention? What made you really, really confident that you could restructure it at that type of velocity?
So there were 3 things that they just had fundamentally wrong, and they were wrong because they were doing it the way they had always done it instead of thinking about it in a data-driven analytical way. And maybe, like most things, your strengths, your weakness. I mean, I analyze everything. It's just the way my brain is wired. So, as an example, what they did in the early stages is every time they added, I think it was 8 new locations, they would add another customer service rep to their
Mhm.
customer service. Well, that made plenty of sense when you had 30 locations. But when you had 3,000 locations, they had an unbelievably bloated, and I remember when I was COO at the time and I was looking, and one of the things I always do is I insist on weekly staff meetings where all the department heads give me just a one-page summary of what's going on. And I looked
Mhm.
at the data and I was like, "Wait a second, this can't be right." You're telling me the average customer service rep only is on the phone 2 hours a week? I'm like, "Wait a second, that means they're working 1/20th of the time, and even if you allow for some idle time." And so we were able to take all those people that were basically sitting there doing nothing, literally doing nothing for something like 85% of the week, and redeployed them to another part of the company that was revenue producing. So they already had expertise in cryptocurrency, but they weren't doing anything in the customer support team, so we just changed the role to a revenue producing role. And so that did two things. One, it increased revenue on our trade desk and it reduced our cost on the customer service team. The other thing was how they were looking at where they would place their locations was very unsophisticated. They would just say, do we have one in a 10-mile radius? And if not, then we can find a convenience store that will take one. We'll just take anybody who will take our machine. Well, obviously not very analytical. The reality was we could at least double the efficiency of the location placement by thinking about one, it's different in an urban, rural, and suburban location about what that distance should be between locations. But you also have to look at where all your competitors are too. So, so we just got way more sophisticated. I brought in a friend of mine who had done location analysis for McDonald's.
Mhm.
And so we did a very sophisticated one. I built a data warehouse. I had my team build the data warehouse, and then we got very, very data driven about looking at the performance of locations and what the variables were that predicted whether a location would work well. And then we use those variables to forecast where to put new locations. But the biggest differential, it doubled revenue in 90 days and it at least quadrupled EBITDA. Basically, we were charging like a 6.5% transaction fee. The two biggest players, we were the number two crypto ATM company in the world. The number one and number three, they were
Mhm.
charging 20 and 22%. So they were charging more than triple what we
Mm.
were charging. So for me, it was basically, look, we could double our rates, right? Double our revenue and still be 30% less expensive than our competitors. It took me a year so the actual implementation took 90 days. It took me a year to persuade them that this wasn't gonna harm the business.
Mhm.
And so what I did was I designed a test where we basically took, 3 different price points, and we had these, a really clean analysis where we ran a test for 30 days, and we just measured the results, and the data made it very clear that we would double our revenue, we would lose no customers,
Mhm.
and so it was a no-brainer. So once we implemented that within 90 days, revenue went from 75 million a year to 150 million a year.
Wow. Speaking of tests, because so you just kind of mentioned this concept of testing these ideas or these initiatives, right? When you put them out in the world. So you actually reject inherited playbooks on principles. You're like, no. So when you enter a new market, how do you tell the difference between a genuine industry specific requirement and legacy thinking that gets dressed up as one? What's your test for what to preserve versus rebuild?
Well, it's a really good question. So what are people using to make decisions, right? So you'll see people have KPI, the key performance indicators all the time, but it's not necessarily a number that they're even looking at or making a decision. Because if I have a number that's being tracked, but doesn't matter what that number is, it's not going to change a decision that I make, then it's a useless piece of information.
Hmm.
I only want actionable information. So by having conversations with the various people, and because I've got a fair amount of experience, just by asking questions about, well, how do you make that decision? Well, how do you decide how you're going to increase staffing or reduce staffing? How do you decide whether you're going to modify pricing? And so just by asking those questions and hearing their answers, oh, what reports do you look at? What information do you look at to decide that? It
Yeah.
becomes fairly obvious fairly quickly about what data and information is really actionable and usable, and maybe what information is missing, right? That's the other thing, which is, hey, if I had piece of, you know, X, Y, and Z data, I can make way better decisions. Well, is it cost effective to get that data? In many companies that I've either consulted to or ran, one of the very first things I do is build a data warehouse.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, when I was running this Forex prop trading firm in Miami, I mean, we had data in like 4 different systems. It was impossible to make a decision. So the very first thing I did was I brought in a guy who was really great on the data architecture side. And I have a tech background, so I know how to oversee that kind of thing. And we built a data warehouse, and then I had the data necessary to make the right decision. So it's usually a process like that where I'm talking to the people that are doing the work currently,
Hmm.
and just through a series of questions about what data they're using, what data they're missing, the path's usually pretty clear.
That's really good. I do think, especially in today's age, this concept of data architecture, that's going to be where some of the waves of roles are, is how do you actually organize this information so that we can pull it into the right places for decision making. Hey, I've got a quick message for our audience. I want you to think about your own organization's hidden leverage. What are you accepting simply because that's how we've always done it? We'd love for you to share your experiences with us on LinkedIn and other social media using Dynamic Decisions Podcast. Okay, so you call yourself a servant leader who exists to remove friction for the people beneath you. That's really an appealing theory, but it's a lot harder when you're also driving aggressive flight targets like some of the ones that you've been driving. So when those two pressures collide, what does servant leadership actually look like in practice?
So I think when it's done right, I don't think they collide ever. And I'll explain. So, because obviously it depends so much on how you hire and how you reward people. So as an example, whenever it's my decision, every single employee has equity in the company. If you want people to act like owners, you have to make them owners. You'll get some people who are just a very highly motivated person that will act like an owner when they're not an owner. But I would argue you're taking advantage of that person. So I don't really feel good about that. And two, most people aren't gonna work nearly as hard if they're not an owner. So it's imagine you're doing quarterly board meetings with your whole company and the company's doing really well. Well, how are the employees gonna feel? Oh, good for you. You and the, shareholders are gonna make a lot more money, nothing more for me. But if you're a shareholder, now it's like, I'm making more money too. Oh, wow, the company's now worth 75 million. It was worth 50 million, last quarter. Like now all of a sudden everyone's getting really excited. And so if you hire properly, you have the right incentive structures. The thing that most people, when they're trying to be a servant leader, get wrong, a few things they get wrong. One, you have to understand that your job as a servant leader is to deflect as much credit as humanly possible and to absorb as much blame as humanly possible. Your
Yeah,
job is also to be something like at least 30% therapist. People that are CEOs, I have a 25-year-old guy I'm mentoring now. He's going to have a 9-figure exit here in the next probably 12 to 18 months. First time
wonderful.
CEO. And we were talking about this very topic. And I was like, Cole, I said, you would rather have, I said, I get that you think as CEO, you shouldn't have to spend your time babysitting people, right? You could call it that if you want to. But at the end of the day, if you want people to really kill for you, they have to know that you really care about them, and that's not the kind of thing you can fake. You can't fake caring about someone, or at least not very well, you
Yeah.
know? And we've all had that boss who really cared about us, and we'd crawl naked over broken glass for that person, right? As opposed to the person who you knew didn't care about you. It's just, hey, I got to fill a shift. You're a cog in a
Hmm.
machine. That person's going to get work from you, but they're not going to get the same level of work. And so if
Good.
you can really be that sort of guiding light for the people in your company, you have a clear vision, you align incentives. My experience is not that there's conflict. People are happy to work harder because there's a financial benefit for them to work harder, not just because I said so.
Oh, that's good. Really good stuff. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Okay, we're gonna head into what is my favorite part of this whole thing, which is I get to explore your decision making style through this quick little persona assessment. So I'm gonna offer you 4 different ways of framing a decision, and after each one, you're gonna tell me how much that framing matches how you actually decide, and you get this scale from 0 to 100% for each. You
Okay.
only get 100% total across all 4 because
Okay.
I'm a lot of fun, and you, cannot get them all up front. You do them one at a time, so you've just
Oh,
gotta be careful to keep
got it. Okay.
at 100% because that just makes it more interesting.
Sure.
Okay, all ready?
Ready.
Yay! Okay, here we go. The first one is called the feeler. It's a values-driven leader. Prioritizes alignment with values and mission, which weighs the human impact of your decisions alongside of business metrics. Okay. So here's your feeler question. When I'm about to redesign comp or push an aggressive timeline, I ask myself, beyond the efficiency gain, what does this do to people's well-being and or our culture? You built the 30 Acts of Kindness Foundation and have spoken about how a misdiagnosis reshaped your purpose. So, if maximum financial efficiency required compromising your servant leader philosophy, how much weight would values alignment get? So, David, how much does approaching the decision that way resonate with you?
Um, Out of 100%, I've got 4, I'm probably gonna give it, like, 20%.
Okay, tell
Yeah.
me more.
So, one of the things I do at every and I've done this probably for the last 10 years. I'm embarrassed I didn't do it before that. But I always make sure that I have an internal set of core values and an external set of core values. And I use it as a filter. So the internal core values, and by the way, I don't dictate these as the leader. Uh, I basically have the entire company and the executive leadership team participate in selecting the internal and external core values. So let's say the internal core values might be things like grit and integrity and discipline and things like that. And then what I basically do is I create an award for each one of the, let's say there's 4 core values, and the internal core values are what are used to hire, promote, and reward people within the organization. So if I'm thinking, hey, do I want to hire this person? Well, I have to run that person through my core value filter. Not just me, but everyone in the organization does that. And then what I do is every quarter, we pay whoever won the award the last quarter awards that. So let's say grit was one of the core values. If I won the grit award the prior quarter, it's my job to award it the next quarter. So, one, they get the award, they get a small financial, bonus too. And it
Mhm.
just reinforces those core values throughout the entire organization. Everyone kind of looks forward to that. And then the external core values are what are the things that I look for in partnerships or in the product or service that I'm delivering. So if I want to make changes to the product and service, it has to go through that external core value filter to make sure that, it's in alignment with what we're doing. Because I feel like you need something like that. Once you get above, say, 25 people, you need stuff like that to keep people aligned.
Yes, you do. Very good. And I hope the audience is paying attention to these very strategic little details that you're giving them on how to execute this. Okay, the next one is called the planner. It's a strategic visionary. Focuses on long term implications and second and third order effects across multiple scenarios. So here's the next frame. When I choose which company to join or which venture to back, I ask myself, does this create durable advantage or just an attractive acquisition target? Does the sales engine I'm building scale to 10x or hit a ceiling? Does the scaling create capability that compounds or fragility when conditions shift? Across your AI longevity and trading bets, are you building one coherent strategy or deliberately preserving optionality to pivot? All right, David. So, how much does that forward looking scenario based framings match how you decide?
Probably only about 10%, and I'll tell you why. I've raised a lot of capital in my career, and whenever you do that, you put together a 5-year budgeting and forecasting model as a general rule. And if you do it properly, your first year is unbelievably detail oriented and thoughtful and bottoms up of every last scrap of detail you can think of. Once you get in year 2, a lot less, and by years 3, 4, and 5, very little detail. Because same detail, but in terms of like what the parameters and how they're going to change over time. Because the reality is the conditions on the ground are changing all the time. If you spend too much time thinking about 3 and 5 and 10 years down the road. Now, look, if you're a pharmaceutical company and you've got an 8-year FDA approval process or something like that, it's a different animal, right? But for most businesses that don't fall into that category, you want to be really, really thoughtful about what's going to happen over the next 12 months and perform against that. And you want an eye to what's going to happen. But once you get past year 1, it's much more about systems and processes and a lot less about goals
Hmm.
because the goals are going to shift because again, never more true than it is now with AI, right? If you had made all of your plans 3 years ago before AI was really anything, they'd be completely different now. Like,
Mm-hmm.
as an example, the 30 Acts of Kindness app that you mentioned, my 84-year-old father coded it in 2 weeks, right? Normally, for less than $1,000.
Mm,
Normally, the timeline and cost to build a really good app would be something like 9 to 12 months and $100,000 plus. So
mhm.
if you've done all your planning based on 9 to 12 months and $100,000 3 years ago, all your plans are garbage now. So I think that it really is. And then what you want to do, though, is you need to revisit years 2 through 5 at the end of every year. And that way,
Mhm,
your next year is always really clear and it gets a
mhm.
little bit foggier as you get further out into the future. So that's why, getting too long-term focused, I only have 10%. I want an eye to it, but I don't want it to be what's driving my decision making today.
Oh, that's good. Yes. Okay, here we go. The next one is called the challenger of assumptions. So here, this questions conventional wisdom and looks for contrarian opportunities. So here's a more contrarian frame. Most operators treat deep industry experience as the asset. You treat it as the bias. So I ask myself, is industry expertise actually an advantage or the very thing that blinds incumbents to fresh solutions? One of your mentees put it well that you can take almost any problem in an industry you've never worked in and still see it clearly. Is being the outsider who applies patterns across markets your real edge? So David, how much does that assumption challenging style resonate with how you make decisions?
It's probably 35%. And by the way, I love what you just said, where you said it's bias, not an asset. I'm stealing that. I love that. I love saying it that way. And that's exactly right, which is not to say that the way it's always been done is wrong. It might be right. In fact, in probably something like 60 or 70% of the cases, it is right. But that's 30 to 40%. That's a huge opportunity. I'll give you an example. I was running this telemedicine company, and I don't know if you know anything about telemedicine, but there's a company called Teladoc, and they were the 800-pound gorilla in the space. They were publicly traded, unbelievable amount of cash on their balance sheet, and they had over 90% market share. My company had like zero market share. Over the next 5 years, 100% of our customers we stole from Teladoc. And we did it by changing the entire business model. Everyone told us the business model couldn't possibly work because everyone in the industry was using low utilization. So they're like, you know what? It's kind of,
Mm,
they were using more like the gym membership. Let's sell it to a bunch of people and have very few people come, and that's how we're going to make money. I said, well, what if we went the other way? Because we were the new company, and I'm trying to
mhm,
get them to not go with Teladoc, the one everyone's heard of, the one that's got a great balance sheet, the one that's publicly traded. How am I going to compete against that? I can't play on the same playing field as them. I have to change the playing field. So what I did was I said, Teladoc's averaging 2% utilization, which means in a 100-person company, they get 2 phone calls a year. For us, a 100-person company, we would get 55 phone calls. So I'm like, I'm 25 times better than Teladoc. And so the part that was crazy was we charged 10 times as much as Teladoc,
hmm,
and we got zero pushback on price. And the reason we did that, we contractually guaranteed 100% of our clients' investment, that we would give them hard dollar savings. That was at least $1.25 for every dollar they invested. At the worst they could possibly do, or we'd refund everything back to $1. And my sales pitch was really straightforward. It was, I'm willing to put 100% of the fees you pay me on the line because that's how certain I am I can drive this level of utilization. What's
mhm,
Teladoc going to put on the line? Nothing. Why do
mhm,
you think that is?
mhm.
And our close rate was unbelievable. And in the 5 years I was there, we never lost a client, not one in 5 years.
Amazing. Okay. All right. That leaves us at our last one. Are you ready? It's called Woo Woo Woo, your favorite. I believe this is going to resonate with you. It's the data driver. It's the evidence-based decision maker. So you rely on metrics and concrete evidence, preferring proof over intuition. So let's frame it. Before I restructure operations or back a company, I ask myself, what does the data actually say? What analysis told you upfront which coin flip changes would work versus which were bets? And then the harder half, how do I measure what resists measurement? Like whether servant leader culture is genuinely working or just masking team frustration. How do you balance rigorous data with the judgment calls, pattern recognition, and trust signals that can't be cleanly quantified? So, David, how much does that data driven, evidence focused framing match how you make your strategic decisions?
Well, I'm going to give it the final 35%, which is probably where I would have given it even if I had known up front what all four categories were going to be. In fact, it's bouncing those last two items off each other. It's the data-driven analytics part with the, "Hey, let's be creative, think outside the box" part. It's a bit of both, right? Because ultimately, in order to do good data analytics, you have to come up with a hypothesis.
Come
And
on,
then you have to test that hypothesis.
you
And
do.
so, you know what it is? A lot of it comes down to, and this is the part that I think a lot of very intelligent, successful people get wrong, is smart people are right a lot of the time, but the really smart person remembers that they're also wrong, not an insignificant part of the time. And how can you be so sure this isn't part of that time you're going to be wrong? Don't
Mm,
be emotionally invested in being right. Don't get me
mm,
wrong, I like being right as much as the next person, but I'm not emotionally invested in it. In fact, I have very strong positions loosely held. I'm the easiest person to convince I'm wrong about something. Show
mhm,
me the premise that I have that's incorrect. Show me the piece of data that I'm basing a decision on that's wrong, and I'll change my decision like that.
mhm,
One of the biggest mistakes I see is people think they're being data driven and analytical when they really aren't.
mm-mm.
This is most common in areas of marketing. So people are going to try a new marketing campaign, paid advertising or influencer marketing or whatever it might be, right? And one of the things I always say is you have to define success before you run your test.
Mhm.
Because otherwise you'll just talk yourself into it, right?
That's right.
So, and I see it all the time. I mean, back at CoinFlip, against my advice, they spent about $10 million on a TV campaign. They
Mm,
got the guy from Doogie Howser and How I Met Your Mother, Neil Patrick Harris, to be our
mhm.
person. And we tested. We bought a bunch of TV time. We paid all this money to him, and they get the TV production done. And we ran it in 3 markets. In 2 of the 3 markets, our brand awareness went down.
Fascinating.
So we set $10 million on fire, right?
Yeah,
And, and I think that with even basic analysis up front, it would have been pretty clear that that was a fool's errand. So
that's
I
right.
think that you got to define the success up front, because the part that was crazy was because they didn't define success up front, when they were done, they're like, maybe it really was still worth it because maybe we got the other ancillary benefit. You're just trying to talk yourself into the fact you didn't make that decision, as opposed to, look, when I make mistakes, and I'll give you an example, the single biggest professional mistake I think I've ever made in my life was at that Forex prop trading firm. I was convinced by some people on my team, still my fault, I'm the boss, it's that we should do a 50% discount for
Mhm.
this 1 month. And it might be the dumbest business decision I've ever made. If I'd
Wow.
done better analytics up front, I would have understood that there was no way that was going to work out well. Now, we did actually have our best month ever in sales,
Yeah,
right? But what you're doing in that example, we were training our customers and our prospects to accept a lower price as opposed to trying to be value driven. And it was a huge mistake. But because I think I'm fairly humble in my approach, like, again, I'm always open to being wrong. As much as I like to be right, I'm open to being
yeah.
wrong. And as soon as the data showed me I was wrong, I changed like that and I fixed the problem. So yeah, big mistake, but it didn't damage the business ultimately because I was open to being wrong and took in new information and made adjustments based on the conditions on the ground being different than I thought.
So good. Oh my goodness, David. First of all, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for sharing your insights, for being transparent about the things that work and the things that don't work, because I believe that these things will actually help those in our audience. And I also want to thank you for highlighting how and where expertise is actually developed, and that expertise still has a seat at the table when it comes to a business growing and how we actually make decisions. So thank you so much. Would you tell our audience where they can learn more about you and more about your company?
Best way is, so across all my socials, I'm at Real Dave Guttman. All my podcasts are there, a lot of my content, and gutmanmedia.com. If anyone's interested in my public speaking, my TED Talk, stuff like that, you can find all that stuff on my socials and on my website, gutmanmedia.com.
Fantastic. And to our listeners, we want to thank you for tuning in. Remember, the best decisions come from great conversations. We hope that you've enjoyed this episode. We'd love for you to subscribe, rate, share it with your network, and let's keep the conversation going on social media using Dynamic Decisions Podcast. And until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and keep leading with purpose.